morning, Warhawks. I'm Max, and today is Wednesday, March 2nd. This is WTN News. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget that tomorrow is Swagalicious Thursday. Don't forget to dress to impress tomorrow. Also, look out for one of our WTN reporters out and about in the courtyard tomorrow to get some footage of you for the Swagalicious showcase. Course selection. If you have seen something new or something you didn't know we had here at Seminole when you chose your courses for next year, we want you to know that you have until March 10th to make any changes you'd like to see in next year's class schedule. So if you have changed your mind since doing your course selections, stop by guidance and you can make changes anytime before March 10th. The First Priority Club will meet today in A14 during lunch. If you have any questions about First Priority or would like to be a part, see Mr. Martin. After school today will be the following clubs and events. There is a Pancake Fundraiser in the cafeteria right after school. The Robotics Club meets in A12. Big Band is rehearsing in the band room. Interact Club is meeting in A18. And the SHS Beautification Club meets in E3. In sports, the Seminole Soccer end-of-year banquet is tonight at 6 p.m. Testing season is here. In fact, all juniors are currently taking the SAT test. To prepare for the EOCs, AP exams, and final exams in your classes, we are going to view a series of videos from the website Crash Course. It was built and designed for college students, but has some great content for us today. Check it out.
Hi, I'm Thomas Frank. This is Crash Course Study Skills, and today we're going to look at how to take great notes. And you're probably going to want to write that down. Why focus on your notes? Well, simply put, when it comes to learning and retaining information, output is just as important as input. When you're first learning a fact or a concept, you're intaking new information. But to retain that information for a long time, you need to store it in a place that you can easily access later on, and you need to put it in your own words. Now, before we talk about specific note-taking systems, what information you should actually record in your notes, and whether or not it's helpful to blend them up and drink them like a milkshake, let's start with what's going to set you up for success in the first place, showing up to class prepared with the right tools. There are three routes you can go in selecting those tools: paper, computer, or ARM. What's the best option? Well, unless you're that guy from Memento, we can probably narrow it down to either paper or computer. Between those two, there's been a debate going on for years, but we do have some recent scientific evidence that we can turn to for some hard answers. According to a study done at Princeton University in 2014, students who took notes on a 15-minute lecture using a laptop wrote an average of 310 words, while those who wrote on paper only averaged 173. So it seems that typing your notes definitely does give you a speed advantage. The downside to becoming the metaphorical speed racer of note-taking, though, was that these same students were able to recall less information when tested later on. So why does this happen? Well, the root of the problem lies in the fact that the computer note-takers were much more likely to record what was being presented word for word. Let's go to the thought bubble. When you're paying attention to a lecture, there are two aspects of the information being presented. Since complex information is communicated through language, be it written or spoken, we get both the syntax, like the letters and sounds that make up the words, as well as the meaning. When you're typing out your notes, the speed advantage enables you to record a much more complete version of what your teacher is saying. However, your working memory, the part of your memory that deals with the information you're currently intaking, can only deal with so much at a time. And current cognitive science research puts that amount at around 4 bits or chunks of information, which we'll talk about in another video. The combination of that recording speed advantage and your built-in mental processing limit can lead you to devote more mental resources to the syntax of the message, those pesky letters and sounds, and less to the actual meaning. As a result, you learn less in class and you create more work for yourself later on. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So does this mean that a pen and paper always beats your laptop? Well, not necessarily. Now that you know that the speed increase you get through typing has a downside, you can just resolve to type less and pay more attention to the meaning of the message while you're in class. Still, paper does have an implicit advantage as it requires less self-control. Your longhand writing speed automatically limits how much you pay attention to the syntax, and as a bonus, you don't have to worry about being tempted to go on Facebook in the middle of class either. Regardless of what tool you decide to choose though, make sure you come into class well prepared. If you're using paper, have a well-organized notebook with plenty of blank space, as well as a good quality pen that you enjoy writing with. And if you decide that a computer fits your style better, find a good note-taking app like Evernote or OneNote, Dropbox Paper, or any other that fits your fancy. You should also close out of any apps or websites that aren't relevant to the lecture. That'll help you stay focused, though you still might have to work to ignore that guy in front of you who's taking a BuzzFeed quiz to figure out his Hogwarts house. I'm a Ravenclaw, by the way. Though that's just what a Slytherin would say, isn't it? Anyway, now that you're prepared and equipped with the right tools, what exactly should you be recording with them? After all, you can't just record everything. As the famous mathematician Eric Temple Bell noted, the map is not the thing mapped. Just like a map is useful only if it summarizes and simplifies what it represents, your notes are a useful reviewing tool only when there's a high signal-to-noise ratio. That means they've got to be packed with the information you need to know for the tests and later application, and devoid of anything that doesn't matter. It's a bit hard to make specific recommendations here since there are so many different subjects and classes in which you'll need your note-taking skills. However, we can put forth some general guidelines that will point you in the right direction. First and foremost, gauge each class you're taking early on. Carefully look at the syllabus, pay attention to any study guides or review materials you can get your hands on, and make mental notes about different types of questions you see on early quizzes and tests. Additionally, anytime you hear your professor say something like, "This is important, pay attention," in lecture, that's a cue to take extra careful notes. A lot of my friends in school thought I was a cue to take a nap, but they were wrong. Beyond that, whether you're sitting in class or going through a reading assignment in your textbook, you want to pay special attention to things like big ideas, summaries, overviews, or conclusions, bullet lists, like this one, terms and definitions, and examples. And examples are doubly important, especially in classes where you have to apply concepts and formulas to problems, like in math or physics. You can probably remember times when an example presented in class made perfect sense, but then a later homework problem using the same exact concept completely stumped you. There's a big difference between being able to follow along while someone else solves a problem and having the chops to solve it on your own. But by recording every detail of the examples you see in class, as well as making side notes about why the concepts being used work, you'll have a lot more ammunition to work with while you're tackling those homework problems. Now that we've covered the elements of good, useful notes, let's get into the specifics of how to take them. Now there are plenty of note-taking systems out there, each with their own pros and cons, but with this video, we're just going to focus on 3. The outline method, the Cornell method, and the mind mapping method. The outline method is probably the simplest one of them all, and it's likely the one you're most familiar with. To use it, you just record the details of the lecture or book you're reading in a bullet list. Each main point will be a top-level bullet, and underneath it you'll indent further and further as you add more details and specifics. The syllabus I wrote for this very crash course series is a good example of outline-style notes. Each video's outline has several different top-level bullets, followed by several levels of detail. And yes, this is my actual outline. Now, the outline method is great for creating well-organized notes, but because it's so rigid, you can easily end up with a ton of notes that all look the same. So to prevent that from happening, use formatting tricks to make important details stand out when you're reviewing them later on. For example, in these notes I took during an information systems class, you can see that I've got several details written down underneath prototyping. All of them were important enough to write down, but since the professor specifically mentioned that quick development and low cost were the most important aspects of prototyping, I made sure to bold that line. Next, we're going to go over the Cornell method. Developed by the Cornell University professor Walter Pock back in the 1950s and popularized in his book How to Study in College, the Cornell method is a time-tested system that involves dividing your paper or a table in your note-taking app into 3 distinct sections: the cue column, the notes column, and the summary column. During a lecture, take your actual notes in the aptly named notes column. Yeah, you'll learn that there's not a whole lot of misdirection when it comes to study skills. Anyway, here you can use any method you want, be it the standard outline method that we just talked about, or something more flexible. At the same time, when you think of questions that weren't answered in the lecture, or that would be great prompts for later review, write them down in the cue column. These questions will come in handy when you're going through your notes in the future, as they'll point you to the most important information and help to frame your thinking. The summary area will remain empty until the lecture is over. Once that time comes, take 2 or 3 minutes to briefly look over the notes you took and the questions you wrote down, and then write a 1 to 2 sentence summary of the biggest ideas that were covered. This serves as an initial review, which helps to consolidate everything that was presented up here and to solidify your understanding while everything is still fresh in your mind. If neither of these 2 methods seems like the right fit for you, you might like the final method we're going to cover, which is mind mapping. Mind maps are diagrams that visually represent the relationships between individual concepts and facts. Like outline-style maps, they're very hierarchical, but that's where the similarities end. Outline-style notes are linear and read much like normal text, while mind maps look more like trees or spider webs. To create a mind map, you write the main concept smack dab in the middle of the page, and then branch out from there to flesh out the details. This method works really well on paper, but there are also apps like Coggle, which will let you create mind maps on your computer as well. So what's the best method? Well, that's up for you to decide. I recommend trying each one out and making your own tweaks as you go along. Also, remember that not every class will work best with the exact same method. Your history notes are probably going to look pretty different from your math notes. So that's where we're going to wrap this video up. At this point, you should know how to come to class prepared to take good notes, what to focus on during the lecture, and what method to use. In a future video, we'll follow up on these points with some tips on how you can review those notes during your study sessions, but for now, just go take some good notes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Crash Course Study Skills is filmed at the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney Crash Course Studio in Missoula, Montana, and it's made with the help of all of these nice people. If you'd like to help keep Crash Course free for everyone, forever, you can support the series on Patreon, a crowdfunding platform that allows you to support the content you love. Thanks so much for your support. Hi, I'm Thomas Frank, this is Crash Course Study Skills, and I've got some bad news for you. You know that little voice in the back of your head that's telling you it's impossible to read all 847 pages your teacher assigned you last week? It's right. To counter that with some good news though, that's okay. Today we're going to be diving deep into how you can make the most out of the time you spend on your reading assignments, both by learning how to boost your reading speed and how to remember more of what you read. First, I want to jump right in and ask the same question that you probably ask yourself every time you look at a syllabus. Do I actually need to do all this reading? Well, some of your teachers might object. The answer is no, and that's because your time isn't limitless. In a perfect world, you'd be able to pore over every detail of every book in the world and become smarter than Jimmy Neutron. But in this world, you've got other things competing for space in your schedule, like your homework, extracurriculars, and marathoning Jimmy Neutron. There are other reasons as well, like sometimes you'll see a lot of overlap between what's in the book and what you'll hear in lectures. So how do you know what reading to actually do? Cal Newport's book, How to Become a Straight A Student, provides a pretty good framework for answering that question. He divides assigned readings into two groups: assignments from the class's favorite source, which is usually the main textbook, and supplemental readings. You should generally do all the readings from each favorite source, but you can afford to be a bit more selective when it comes to the supplemental readings. Cal provides a hierarchy for prioritizing them, where readings that make an argument take precedence over descriptions of events or people, which in turn are more important than anything that provides context, like press clippings or speeches. What I'll add to that though is that every class is different. Sometimes you'll find that everything in the textbook is mirrored in the slides, and other times you'll still need to look through the reading assignments, but skimming for important main concepts and vocab terms will suffice. And of course, some classes will require you to barricade yourself in your room with 6 weeks rations and those freaky eye things from A Clockwork Orange to hold your eyes open. But by paying careful attention and gauging each one, you'll be able to make smart decisions about what to read, skim, or skip. Now, aside from doing some triage in your reading assignments, the other main way to get through them faster is to learn how to read more quickly. We have to be careful here though, because this is where the term speed reading starts getting thrown around. And you get people claiming that they can teach you how to read 1,000 words per minute or more. Sadly, that just isn't possible. As much as I'd love to be able to plow through an entire book over my morning coffee, we humans have some hardwired limits on how far we can push our reading speeds. On to the thought bubble. Let's have a look at the eye. Your visual range is made up of 3 areas: the fovea, parafoveal, and periphery. Of these, only the fovea has a high enough density of cones, the type of photoreceptor cell in your eye that can perceive small details, to make out text on a page. Since the fovea is pretty small, your eyes read text by making quick, jerky movements called saccades. In between each of these saccades is a small pause called a fixation, and this is when the eye intakes the 1 to 2 words it's currently focused on and sends them to your prefrontal cortex for processing. Both saccades and fixations take time to do, which essentially sets a speed limit on how fast you can visually process text. And that's just for recognizing the actual letters and words. There are other factors that contribute to a lower speed limit for how quickly you can read text and comprehend it. The main one is your working memory constraints. Just like the RAM in a computer, your working memory can only process so much at once. Right now, cognitive science quantifies that at about 4 to 7 bits or chunks of information, which we'll talk about more in the next video about how your memory works. For now, it's enough to say that you need to give your working memory time to deal with each chunk that comes in before feeding it another one. And you do this by pausing frequently while you're reading. Additionally, even skilled readers spend about 15% of their reading time on regressions, in which the eye moves backwards to reread text. That time is split between small regressions due to saccades that went too far the first time and larger ones that are needed for comprehension. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Now, your speed is helped by the fact that you naturally skip words when reading, and your brain is incredibly good at knowing which ones to skip while still retaining good comprehension. Studies have shown that while reading, your eyes fixate on about 85% of the content words, the words that carry the actual ideas, and only about 35% of the function words, which are those glue words like the, and, if, etc. But even with the speed boost that comes from this intelligent word skipping, research has also shown that skilled college-level readers can expect to read anywhere from between 200 to 400 words per minute. For the vast majority of us, anything beyond 400 is getting into skimming territory, where your comprehension comprehension starts dropping real quick. But what about speed reading techniques, you might ask? The people that run those speed reading seminars and claim that they can read at 2,000 words per minute say that there are techniques out there for breaking past that normal speed range, like increasing the amount of text you process during each fixation, flashing words in one spot rapidly, and eliminating subvocalization, that voice that reads aloud in your head while you read silently. Sadly, each of these techniques has been tested scientifically and shown to be ineffective. For one, increasing the size of each fixation through training would be pretty tough, since you would literally have to grow more cones in your eyes. And if you figure out how to do that, I recommend not telling anyone unless they say they're from the X-Men. Additionally, this idea still wouldn't do anything about your working memory constraints, which is the main problem that also plagues rapid serial visual processing, or RSVP, a technique that involves flashing words rapidly in one spot. The idea here is to eliminate the need for saccades, but it breaks down because it doesn't allow the brain to intelligently skip function words or to do any regressions. This has the dual effect of overtaxing your working memory and not allowing you to go back over a line you didn't understand the first time. And finally, eliminating subvocalization is a misguided idea because that inner voice is actually quite important. As the researcher Elizabeth Schotter noted, attempts to eliminate inner speech have been shown to result in impairments in comprehension when texts are reasonably difficult and require readers to make inferences. At this point, it might seem like I'm the bad guy and that your only hope is to get on Amazon and buy those Clockwork Orange eye things. But there is hope. Like any other skill, you can become better at reading. The main way to do this is to simply practice. Read often, read widely, and make sure the material is suitably difficult. Those dense chapters in your psychology textbook aren't going to get any easier if you practice on one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish, though that is a great book. Another problem that might bring down your reading speed is daydreaming. When I'm reading, I'll sometimes get lost thinking about a specific sentence I read and end up staring into space, which wastes a ton of time and makes the other people around me wonder if I'm dead. If you have this problem as well, you can set a time goal for the chapter. When I do this, I don't always finish on time, but it does help me stay focused. Finally, when you're reading books that don't require you to comprehend every word, you can speed things up with the pseudo-skimming technique. Skim the text while keeping an eye out for main ideas, vocabulary terms, and anything else important. When you notice one, slow down and read the entire paragraph that encompasses it. A good way to spot these is to pay special attention to the first and last sentence of each paragraph, as well as any bolding, italics, or other formatting. Looking out for these little bits of formatting will also help you to remember what you read, which is what we're going to shift our focus to now. One of the most common ways that students attempt to remember what they read is through highlighting, which, to be fair, is useful if done right. The problem is that it's really easy to highlight too much, since everything seems important when you're first reading it. And this works against you because it's easy to believe that you know the things you've highlighted. When you look back through the book later on, you'll see them, think, oh yeah, I remember highlighting that, and then you might decide that you've memorized it. But there are two ways to remember something. You can recall it, or you can recognize it. The danger with highlighting is that it becomes very easy to mistake recognition, which requires a cue, with true recall, which involves pulling the memory from the depths of your brain's archives all on your own. The more you highlight, the greater this danger becomes. So if you do decide to highlight your books, be very selective about what gets highlighted. A better idea might be to adopt what Cal Newport calls the Morse code method. Here's how he explains it. First, if you come across a sentence that seems to be laying out a big, interesting idea, draw a quick dot next to it in the margin of the book. Secondly, if you come across an example or an explanation that supports the previous big idea, draw a quick dash next to it in the margin instead of a dot. This method lets you avoid slowing down while reading, which enables you to move smoothly through and comprehend the whole text before going back to review. And once you do, the dots and dashes will allow you to take smarter notes on what you've read. Speaking of notes, it's finally time to talk about active reading. This is the process of truly engaging with the text instead of passively just running your eyes over it, which will help you to retain a lot more of what you read. Lots of study books and teachers explain active reading in terms of a system called SQ3R, which stands for survey, question, read, recite, and review. Surveying is essentially pre-reading. Before you start an assignment, skim over the whole thing quickly. Look over the beginning overview, the headings, and any review questions at the end of the chapter. Doing this primes your brain in advance, which will help the most important information stick out later. You can actually see how well priming works right now. Close your eyes for a few seconds and concentrate on a specific color. When you open them, you'll easily notice that color in the environment around you. Surveying does the same thing with text. Questioning simply involves writing out some questions that come to mind before starting the reading. I actually do this quite often before researching my video topics, as it helps to, again, prime my brain to pick out the most important bits and not spend too much time off in the weeds. Reading, well, that's reading. That leads into reciting, which is a catch-all word for either taking notes or summarizing what you've read. Now, if you had infinite time, you could probably do both, but since you probably don't, I'll note that summaries are more useful for big concepts you need to understand intimately, and more detailed notes will be better for fact-heavy readings. We'll cover effective review strategies in a future video. For now, I'll wrap up by mentioning that I don't think you need to follow SQ3R perfectly in order to get the benefits of active reading. In fact, I don't recommend many rigid acronym-based systems at all, except for maybe SCAR. Stop complaining and read. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Crash Course Study Skills is filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney Crash Course Studio in Missoula, Montana, and it's made with the help of all of these nice people. If you'd like to keep Crash Course free for everyone forever, you can support the series at Patreon, a crowdfunding platform that allows you to support the content that you love. Thanks so much for your support.
That is it for our show today. We want to have your information and activities on the show. Send us your news to merrimanma@pcsb.org. If you're interested in being on the show, we would love to have you. Email us for details. Thank you for watching WTN News. Have a great day, Warhawks.